I'd like to have the vote tally put up. We posed a question before this session and put this question out online and got quite a few responses. And this is the answer to the first question. Each of us is more empowered than ever to solve grand challenges. Good majority agree. A persistent minority disagree. Second question, tech is not always good for humanity. An even larger proportion agree, smaller proportion disagree. In a sense, these votes are predictable. In a sense, they're a little contradictory. And we're going to be dealing with all of that as the conference progresses. So let's begin the great debate. Since the day that Peter Diamandis and Ray Kurzweil and Bob Richards first announced Singularity University on this stage in 2008, we have been believers in, exponents of, and proselytizers for the Singularity brand of digital utopianism. Peter Diamandis, who is with us today, a Greek boy. I hope you appreciated the music, Peter. Yeah. He, together with the graduate-level university which Singularity has become, plus all the many thousands of people in that orbit, have all become and continue to be the world's great evangelists for the revolutionary ability of new exponential technologies to solve the world's great problems. Nonetheless, in the last year or two, the sheen has begun to come off the digital rose, and many of the darker undersides of the digital promise have come into view. So it's said that news is, by its nature, bad news, that good news is PR, publicity, science, medical breakthroughs. But on the social side, in the worlds of culture and politics, things lately have turned sour, actually quite nasty, and we seem confronted not just by the usual challenges that attend the introduction of any new technology, but by fundamental changes and fissures so deep that they seem to threaten our very society as they destroy democracy. I'll just read off a list of these faults. Widespread fraud, bots, not people, fake news, extremist news, multiple divisions in society, racism, sexism, ageism, terrorism, unsavory images, horrific products, all have led to a catastrophic loss of trust. And hanging over it all, looming over it all, is the prospect of mass unemployment and social dislocation on an epic scale as AI replaces humans. So, to address all of this, and in a departure from our usual format, we will stage the great debate. Lead-off speaker is Peter Diamandis. He will be countered by an antithesis, a statement by Diane Francis. That'll be followed each by rebuttal. He'll have a rebuttal, she'll have a rebuttal, and when all that is done, I will call out a panel of commentators, critics, and cross-examiners. Each in turn will have an opportunity to make their comments on what they've heard, plus pose questions to the original speakers. And when all that is done, I will gather them all in a group, and we'll have a scrum and a free-for-all, and possibly find some consensus. So as I said, the going-in votes are, if we can put them up again, please. Each of us is more empowered than ever. Good majority, disagree, kind of an NDP minority. Permanent. Tech is not always good for us, a larger majority, and a smaller group of disagreement. Okay, Peter, you're up. Just before Peter starts, I want to tell you that he's one of these rare guys who picked up a doctor's degree from Harvard Medical School, no less, just to please his parents. But having done that, he then went on to found the X Prize, consortium of prizes, and as you know, there are these brilliant ideas whereby you generate a tremendous amount of activity by pulling up a relatively small prize and having competing groups across the world work towards a spectacular finish, and they have been spectacularly successful. He is also a veritable whirling dervish of company creation. He started companies that look for and will mine rare earth elements and minerals and asteroids. He's started a company that offers you a zero-G parabola joyride on the edge of space. He started a company that is in pursuit of radical longevity. He's recently, yesterday, started a company that's going to personalize cures for cancer and other diseases. He's an amazing guy. This is Peter.
Before you go, Moses, because I don't want to use my 10 minutes on this.
No, you're going to get...
No, come here, pal. So it's very important to me. I'm here as a huge fan of Moses Znaimer. And just a small story I want to share with you. This was about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when in the days after Ray Kurzweil and I had our dinner in which we proposed this idea of creating this Singularity University, I was having a conversation with Bob Richards, who's one of our associate founders, and said, we need some startup capital. And I remember exactly where I was, where Bob and I said, let's give Moses a call. And this is the kind of man who Moses is. We called him on this dream and said, would you provide us the seed capital to start this university? He was the very first person we called, and Moses was the very first person to help fund. And now, a decade later, Moses, this has come into existence because you said yes. Thank you. We are living during the most extraordinary time ever in human history. A time where each of you have the power to solve any problem you desire. I had a chance to write a book about this. It's called Abundance, The Future is Better Than You Think. I was the closing speaker at the Clinton Global Initiative, and as President Clinton brings me on stage, he says, Peter, why are you so positive about the future? Don't you watch the news? And I said, President Clinton, I'm positive about the future for two reasons. One, no, I do not watch the news. And second, I look at the data. And I want to hit the first one first, which is we're living in a day and age where the news media is a drug pusher. And on every device that you have, you're broadcast every piece of negative news on the planet over and over and over again. And there's a reason for this. As we were evolving in the savannas of Africa, our brains started paying 10 times more attention to negative news than positive news. And their job is to deliver your eyeballs to their advertisers. So you don't hear all the amazing news going on all the time. All you hear is the danger and the peril. And it changes the way you see the future. Your mindset is your most important asset. Please do not give that up to the Crisis News Network. If you look, that's CNN, by the way, look at the evidence over the last 100 years. We've seen incredible shifts. Global income has doubled and tripled. Lifespan has doubled. The cost of food has dropped 20-fold. Energy has dropped 50-fold in price. Transportation, hundreds-fold. Communications, millions-fold in price. We forget how amazing this world truly is. Let's go back just 100 years. 100 years ago, in 1918, in 1 year, 16 million people died. In that same year, 500 million people were infected by the flu. 50 million people died. Imagine the headlines today if that happened. We forget how amazing the world we're living in today truly is. Back then, 6% of Americans had a high school degree. right? 5 days from London to New York, 3.5 months from London to Australia. 8% of homes had a phone, right? 3-minute phone call from Denver to New York was $11, while the average wage was 22 cents. We forget the extraordinary world that we're in. If you look forward, I want to give you a sense of how fast things are changing. This, in 1956, is a 5-megabyte hard drive, $120,000. We noticed when this happened, right? When it's 25 times more memory, 1,000 times cheaper. But did you notice when this happened? When it's 1,000 times more memory for the same price, it doesn't slow down, right? Now it's a terabyte on something you can lose in your pocket. We're seeing a 10 trillion-fold price, performance, volume, and improvement. Yet we don't think about this stuff, these amazing capabilities that we're gaining. Faster, cheaper computers. The oxygen in the room is driving all of these technologies, driving us towards a world of abundance. Technology is the force that takes anything that used to be scarce and makes it abundant over and over again, right? Energy. We used to go and kill whales on the open ocean to get oil to light our night skies. Then we ravaged mountainsides for coal. Then we drilled kilometers under the ground for oil. And now we know the sun bathes the earth in 8,000 times more energy than we consume as a species in a year. Right? Abundant energy means abundant water, health, and learning. At the end of the day, it'll all be free for every single human on the planet, just the same way access to all the information is free on Google or Baidu for the poorest child or the wealthiest child. Time, money, communications, resources, extraordinary progress towards abundance over and over again. This was from a couple of months ago. Off the coast of Japan, in the silt on the ocean, we discovered enough rare earth metals to give us all the batteries and electric cars and computers we need for the next 400 years. There is nothing truly scarce. Right? We're heading towards a world of amazing communications. 5G coming out in the next year. 10 to 100 gigabit connection speeds. Imagine downloading a movie in a fraction of a second. If that's not enough, Facebook and Google and OneWeb, and then on top of that, SpaceX with Starlink. We're heading towards a world where we're going from 3.8 billion, half the planet connected last year. In the next 5 years, we're going to connect every single person on this planet with gigabit connection speeds. Not like you and I got online at 9600 baud, right? So what does 4 billion new minds coming online mean? We're heading towards a world where every single person is empowered to find and solve problems. That's what gives me the greatest hope. We're creating a world where the best way to become a billionaire is help a billion people. The world's biggest problems, the world's biggest business opportunities. We're going to slay problem after problem after problem as we do, because that's what we do. So the data, which I said to President Clinton, let's look at that data. Over the last 200 years, people living in extreme poverty has plummeted from 90%. We're going to be taking it out to 0 very shortly. Literacy around the world has gone from 10% to near 90%. As a father of 2 7-year-olds, I think about this. 200 years ago, half the children on the planet didn't make it to 5 years old. Right? It was a coin flip if your kids survive. What kind of life is that for a mother or a father? Today, it's 4%, still too high. This is global average life expectancy. It's doubled. We're going to double it again very soon. Worried about overpopulation of planet Earth? Don't be. 2 things reduce the population growth rates of cities and countries. You make them better educated and healthier, the growth rate plummets. Right? You can see the charts here. Look at what's going on in terms of natural catastrophe survival. What's going on in the 50s, 60s, 70s that drops the death rate after hurricanes and tornadoes and earthquakes and such? It's spacecraft in orbit, better sensors, saving lives. This is from a friend's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, Steven Pinker. He says, look, we are living during the most peaceful time ever in human history. Did you know that? The most peaceful time ever in human history. It's just that every single cell phone and every single headline blares death, destruction, because that's what gets your attention, because your brains, your amygdalas are wired to save your life by paying attention to negative news over positive news. At the end of the day, we're even seeing military budgets drop by 300%. Extraordinary. So why? Why is this happening? Why now? I guarantee you, we haven't gotten smarter. We haven't had hardware, software upgrades. It's not better politicians, that's for sure. It's the impact of these exponential technologies. These technologies are the force that uplift humanity, take us from scarcity to abundance over and over again. By the way, if you'd like these slides, just email this, send any email, and you'll get these slides sent to you. We're going from a world where it used to be the king and the queen on the rooftops, right? And everybody else in extreme squalor, to a world where we're going from a few haves to all these have-nots, to a world, I believe, in the next 20 years, a world of abundance, where we can meet the needs of every man, woman, and child on this planet. Yes, there's a wealth divide, but we're going from a world of have and have-nots to a world of haves and a world of super haves. A world in which we can truly create a planet that is more peaceful, more prosperous, where we don't fight over survival, where we can take a vacation from survival and look to fulfill our greatest dreams. Ultimately, it's not about creating a world of luxury, but a world of possibility for every man, woman, and child on this planet. Thank you.
In the past, when I've introduced Diane Francis, I've said that she has such a way of cutting through bullshit and reducing even the most complex issues to clear sentences directly put, that we should just let her run the country. At the same time, when I considered who I could turn to in order to take on Peter's rosy view of the world, to take on all the people around Peter's singularity and the whole notion of exponential technologies, someone who could take on the overwhelming success of Amazon and Google and Facebook and Netflix and Uber and B&B and, you know, that whole lot. I knew there was only one guy, one woman with the cojones to do this job, and it's Diane Francis.
Thank you. He's amazing, and he's amazing, right? This is the best conference in Canada, in my opinion, and this is the best proponent for tech in the world, in my opinion. No question. Technology and science will make the world a better place. That is the cover of Peter's fabulous book. It still is fabulous. I don't know whether you update it, but it's as timely as ever. It's tremendous. And it'll be on sale here. But I am with him. He is absolutely right that theoretically, there is no question that tech, any kind of tech, can save the world from itself. I'm concerned we're going to get there. We're not going to get there until there's more ethical transformation of the tech world and development of science and research and corporate behavior and governmental behavior. There must be a moral, ethical, and security framework around transformative technologies. This is what Oppenheimer did after the first atomic bombs were dropped in Japan. He said, oh my God, we are going to be extinct because this is going to spread everywhere and we're not going to survive it. So he got very much involved. In the case of biotech, genetic engineering, and artificial intelligence, there are no moral, ethical frameworks around these technologies. We are not aware of what countries, rogue states, non-state players that are very evil, or whatever you want to call them, are doing, or can get access to, or can buy from, or steal from what's going on. We don't know what corporations are doing. This is the problem. Ethical frameworks are going to be the only way forward. The only way forward. Oppenheimer spent decades getting across to the countries of the world that we needed a non-proliferation mechanism, a framework to contain the nuclearization of the world. And we only, as a result of his efforts, and since, we have contained the nuclearization of countries to only 9. It's still dangerous, it's always dangerous, but imagine if he had not done this, and there is a whole compliance network involving thousands of arrests, investigations every year that track and monitor the creation and the transmission and the trafficking of every material that goes into any kind of nuclear threat product or service. And it still goes on all the time ever since. If we had not done this, we would not be able to look forward to an age of abundance, because we would be extinct. There are good models for what I'm trying to propose here. NASA, and Peter is one of the pioneers of the new space industry sector. He is one of the pioneers. And NASA is the model. NASA had an ethical framework imposed on itself from the beginning of its space exploration endeavors. It said, let's put a man on the moon, but we're not going to do it losing a single life. That put an ethical constraint on what kind of research they did, how sloppy they were, how they had to second guess. The result was they did it. It took discipline, diligence, decades, scientists, consultants, casts of hundreds of thousands of experts from all over the world in mathematics, engineering, science, psychology, and all kinds of things to come up with what the miracle getting the man to the moon represented. And nobody died. When there was a failing engineering-wise, they went back to the drawing boards. They reiterated it. They redid it. They tested ad nauseum. When something failed, there was a bloody commission involved. People were brought in. People were shuffled out. That is how you have to develop transformative technologies. So we have a roadmap. Decades of physical and psychological impact research before they put a person on top of that missile. That rigor is needed for artificial intelligence and genetic engineering and biotech, particularly CRISPR. Without that, we are putting the cart before the horse, and we could end up with a weapon of mass destruction out of either of these areas of technological advance that would destroy us, just like the atomic proliferation would have. We don't have that. Today we have unaddressed ethical questions, which are very important. I won't read them. But playing off the second one, should systems be created that will destroy the livelihoods of human beings without alternatives in place? That is the most immediate one we have to address. You've all seen, the fact is, artificial intelligence and IT destroys jobs and creates surplus workers. So rapidly, there may not be time to anticipate or plan unless there's a framework that controls the development and research of such things. We're at the beginning of the end of work, left unbridled. Everybody's seen this slide. It's Oxford, says 47% of jobs in the US are threatened by artificial intelligence, replacing them or altering them or destroying them. The number in Canada is 45%. Recent institute, the Brookfield Institute did a study. 45% of jobs are threatened in the next 15 years. Just take one thing, robot cars, driverless vehicles, will destroy the truck driver. It's the #1 job in 29 out of 50 states in the United States. These are breadwinners' jobs. This is not messing around. Are you just going to let vehicles be driverless? And what are you going to do with the surplus workers? This is a big ethical question that only a wise society addresses and only a framework can. Faced with this very same dilemma in 1589, Queen Elizabeth refused to patent an automatic weaving machine. Look at her quote, "Consider what the invention would do to my subjects. It would assuredly," she said to the inventor, "make you very rich, sir, but it would bring them ruin by depriving them of employment, thus making them beggars." It was not patented for 200 more years. The King of France did the same thing. You have to give a society time to plan for such an event and make sure there are alternatives. None of that is being done. There's a cute little pilot projects here and there on universal basic income. Nothing is being done by any government. This one really bothers me. This picture, I think, is tragic. These are the two little first cloned primates in China, two little sisters clinging to each other. Look at their little cute faces. What is going to happen to them? The Chinese are promising that they won't do the other primates. They won't clone the other primates. If you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you. If they don't do it, somebody may steal it from them or buy it from somebody. Genetic engineering is a famous photograph of a kitten whose embryo was fooled around with in a kitchen by some kids from MIT, and it glows in the dark. Cute trick. Allegedly doesn't do anything to the health of the animal, but why are we allowing people to play around with embryos of anything? There's no laws, there's no regs, there's really no major control, and there's no ethical constraint. Thou shalt do this or thou shalt not. CRISPR. Recently, the medical fraternity or the regulators in the US stopped some trials, human clinical trials that CRISPR wanted to do on genetic engineering. They're not stopping them, and yes, there's a lot of religious fighting over it, and yes, I know that's an impediment to progress, but these things have to be done deliberately and carefully, because otherwise you get barcode kids. And again, not to pick on the Chinese, because I'm sure it's going on in other jurisdictions, but human embryos, called zygotes, are being edited in China. Human embryos. They say that these are embryos that will not come to term. If you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you. Why are they doing it if they're not going to do more? So right now, all we have in the world is, in my opinion, 3 tech frameworks or templates that are in place right now. They've emerged. Number 1, good old United States, the Wild West. Anything goes. Permissive, unregulated. We have tech giants who spy on us, take our data without our permission, don't tell us who they're selling to, monetizing it by selling it to the highest bidder, including Russians, hiding behind whatevers, and no curation of content. YouTube has been responsible for broadcasting some of the worst hate, libel, and pro-terrorist videos ever. They're cleaning it up. They're trying to clean it up. They're saying they're going to filter it. Don't believe it. Google owns YouTube. And then, of course, there's the infamous Facebook. And Zuckerberg, who said, in the tech world, you can't always see what's going to happen in the future. Just get on with it and break it, and then fix it afterwards. Well, let's see if he fixes the fact that the 2016 election was manipulated, or the Brexit referendum, or Macron's reputation was smeared because of Facebook postings that were allowed, that Facebook allowed. That says all you need to know. The Wild West model of the United States allows snake oil salesmen and hate and libel to be posted. They're trying to clean it up because they're a little embarrassed after the election and the Russian stuff. But, you know, look at that. They pollute the internet. They go out and find the morons for me. Now, they're starting to get a little more responsible. Broadcasters and newspapers have truth in advertising requirements. You can't just let snake oil be advertised. So at least they have the decency recently, both Google, YouTube, and Facebook, to crack down on the cryptocurrency stuff that's being thrown all over the place. So those ads are being banned for the moment. There's a lot of fraud in that space. The second model is the European Union, the 28 countries. They're very, you know, laborious in how they do things, but they are the first region to come up with regulations to protect consumers in society. And here are some of them. Again, my slides are available to anyone. These are what they've attacked, all the things that should have been attacked a long time ago and aren't in the laissez-faire world of tech. Robot ethics and liability, privacy protection, all kinds of things. And then there's China. In 2020, Big Brother becomes reality. They are building out the world's biggest surveillance system, an Internet of Things for 1.4 billion people. 600 million cameras with facial recognition software. In public places, private places, workplaces, in businesses, wherever they can put them. That policewoman has eyeglasses that have facial recognition software for law enforcement. Yes, it's important to have law enforcement with this kind of a system. But what they're doing is all the data, everything you do, everything about you is flowing into one national rating system, and they're giving people a FICO score, 3-digit, based on their lifestyle. It's a behavioral modification tool as well as surveillance. So if you go to an old people's home for an afternoon and help them, in some of the pilot projects, you'll get 100 points. If you give a pint of blood, you'll get 6 points. If you don't look after your parents, you'll be deducted 200. If you get fired, if you cheat, if you jaywalk, all of this stuff is being micromanaged by the Chinese government in 2 years' time. That's what a FICO score on your phone will look like. If you get up to 831 points, boy, you've hit it big. You now get free gym facilities. You get visas. They waive your visas for international travel. You get fast-tracked into hotels. You get discounts on loans. You get discounts on airplane fares. If, conversely, you're down on the 100 or 200 level, forget about your kids getting into a good school. Forget about getting on a train. Sometimes you're back of the line. 11 million Chinese have been denied airfare in punishment for a low score. I call it Big Brother meets Air Miles. So we have the three frameworks, and I don't like any of them. And you shouldn't either. We need a global one for starters. We need a Robert Oppenheimer to say, we will all potentially die from something that's run away by a rogue group if we don't get our arms around this. Thank you.
So the theory of the debate is that each side had 10 minutes to put their case before we went on stage. Diane came up and said, I need an extra 2 minutes. I said, Diane, we haven't even started. You want to break the rules. Why? She said, I'm a girl. I said, that works for me. So now we have the rebuttal phase, and each speaker is allotted 7 minutes. Peter, you can have a little more.
6 minutes and 58 seconds.
Okay, no, and you can have an extra couple minutes if you need it. So each will reply in turn. First, Peter, in reply to Diane.
Thank you, Diane, always a pleasure. So if the debate is technology, promise, or peril, it's a false debate, right? All technology, from the rock to fire, offers promise and peril. It's always both. The point that I want to make here that I think is so important is that we demonize technology. We talk about it negatively. No one forces any of us here to use technology, right? We can throw away our cell phones, our TVs, our cars, and do none of that. We use it because it makes our life better. We're all born with the same 24 hours in a day, 7 days a week. That's the only thing that makes us all common. It's how we use that time. And for me, technology is about using that time more efficiently to do the things that I desire, to increase happiness, to increase connection. So it's not about one or the other, it is both. My point here is for all of us to see the incredible promise that technology brings us. That we're finally alive in a time where it's not the king or the queen or the government that has to solve that problem that has been bothering you, that you're pissed at. It's we can do that. We now have access as individuals to all the computational power, all the knowledge, more capital than ever before in human history. Access to AI, 3D printing on the cloud. At the end of the day, what do you want to do? Because you can do it. And I think it flips the model. The sense of responsibility is on us to stop complaining and stop doing. We are more empowered than ever before. And that power doesn't come out of no place. It comes out of the technology that we're building, that we're creating. And I think the most important thing for me to share with you is this knowledge that the world is getting better at an extraordinary rate on almost every single measure. And when you're only seeing the negative news, you're forgetting that. We romanticize the past when life was short and brutish, and the average age for men 100 years ago was 40. Most of you would not be here. So, is there problems? Of course. I'm not, naive enough to think over the last 100 years, even as all of these metrics have gotten better and better and better, we still had World War I, World War II, the Spanish flu, the Vietnam War, the Depression. 150 million people died over the last century. But I would argue that as a society, we are far better off today. I would much rather be alive today than 100 years ago. And the problems that we face now, we're more empowered than ever before to handle them. You see, our brains, the 100 billion neurons in our brain, the 100 trillion synaptic connections in our minds, have evolved so that we see the dangers far away. We're really great meaning-making machines, pattern-making machines. We detect the danger far away, and we accelerate it to the future and say, holy shit, we got a problem. But we forget that as we move forward, we are inventing the technologies to solve those problems. Right? 100 years ago, the biggest environmental problem that we had in major cities was horse manure. As people moved from the rural areas into the urban areas, they brought with them their motive force, the horse. And as the populations in cities grew, so did the horse manure. And the projections were decimating. Disease was following. But then something happened. We invented the car. And the horse population just went off a cliff. And today we're doing that again, right? We're heading towards an all-electric economy. Autonomous cars, electric cars. In fact, forget about cars altogether. We're going to use avatars and virtual reality to go from point to point. Technology gives us the power to solve every single problem. There is no problem we cannot solve. I agree with you, Diane, about ethics and morals. Absolutely. But here's the other point. They change. They change over time. Right? I'm a medical doctor. No one would come to me for anything medical. Moses was right. I made my parents happy. I had two companies going my fourth year in medical school. I sent them a copy of my diploma, and I went and focused on International Space University and my rocket company. I wish it were funny. But if I went back in time to my great-great-great-great-grandparents in ancient Greece and said to them, listen, my grandfather who's dying of a cardiomyopathy here that guy who got gored by a bull, I'm going to take his dead heart out and transplant it into my great-great-great-great-grandfather. It would have been the work of the devil. Today, it's a miracle. Ethics and morals change over time. Over and over again. We have to realize that. The problem is the institutions that we have, people don't like change, right? We like waking up in the morning and thinking the world is exactly the same as it was the night before. And our government and religious institutions, their job is stabilization. But as exponential technology is doing this and government is trying to hold it down, that's where the challenge is. I agree on the issue of technological unemployment. It's one of the areas that concerns me. I've partnered with Tony Robbins, and we're holding an annual event to talk about solutions there. But I want to flip the conversation slightly. The reality is most of the jobs that we'll lose in the beginning are those that are dull, dangerous, or dirty. Very few people begin life saying, I want to clean toilets or be at the cash register. We all have dreams. But then reality hits us, and we take the job that is available. Technology has the ability to uplift us, to allow us to pursue our dreams, to take a vacation from survival, and to begin to see what is possible. The other thing we have to realize is that we tend to project ourselves as we are today. But we're heading towards a future we're not going to be as we are. We're merging with technology. Right? Ray Kurzweil's prediction is the year 2033, 2035. It's not about AI versus humans. As my friend Brian Johnson says, it's going to be about AI versus HI. It's going to be us augmented. It's us connecting with the cloud. It's us becoming a multicellular species. It's us becoming a meta-intelligence. We are evolving as a human race. We're evolving at an extraordinary rate. We're going from evolution by natural selection, which can call Darwinism, to evolution by human direction. You can try and stop it, you cannot believe it, but it is where we're going. This has been this way since the beginning of time. So, at the end of the day, for me, of course, it's both promise and peril. But I believe there is incontrovertible evidence that technology is making the world a safer, healthier, more uplifting place. The millions of lives, no, the billions of lives we're taking out of poverty, where those children don't have a coin flip to live past age 5. You tell all of them that we should stop technology, right? This is what's allowing us to feed the planet, to give us clean drinking water, to make the cost of energy effectively free, information effectively free. This is the world that I'm working towards, a world where all of these technologies are creating abundance for every single human on this planet, not just for the wealthiest. Yes, we're going from a world of have and have-nots to a world of haves, and yes, there'll be some super haves. But that's okay. I'd make that trade over and over and over again, so every mother knows that her children can have the healthiest possible life, the most educated life, a life of potential. This is what technology is giving us. Do we have obligations to use it, responsibly? Yes, absolutely. But the alternative of saying technology is bad, shut it down, is not an alternative. So I leave it to you and say technology, for me, is one of the most important forces in humanity today for uplifting 8 billion people. It's the only tool we have for uplifting 8 billion people. Thank you.
He's so good. And he's so correct. I'm not here to discount or poo-poo the fact that the kind of technologies that Peter and others have helped foster and bring to light are not amazing. But I think we have to differentiate between the conversation in the first world and in the rest of the world. You go to Africa and you say to a little boy, you know, I can get you a cell phone that can help your little sister how to read. And he says, no, I just want the bribes so that we can get electricity. I just want bribes so I can get electricity for my hut. We are talking about a human nature, maybe. We are talking about humans who are badly disorganized, who are organized on the basis of power, violence, exploitation. We've got to be realistic about that, and Peter is. And I know what he's saying. In some ways, the abundance, when it comes and is available, will help bring down some of those institutions, undermine them, help people not have to accede to them and be under their control. And all of that is good. But then, as I say, the overarching problem is that we see the brilliance of these technologies. We don't know what's being cooked up in labs. We don't know what kind of genetic engineering is going on. We should know, because there will be a potential for mass destruction or negative impact on the whole planet if we don't get our hands around that AI and biotech and genetic engineering globally as we have with nuclear power. Because we wouldn't be here today if Mr. Oppenheimer hadn't said, wow. And it's no surprise he was a graduate of a high school, a very unique high school in Manhattan called the Ethics High School. And Ray Kurzweil went to it as well. So ethics is not a moving target. We all know right from wrong. We know the dangers. Let's just make sure that everybody who is working in these spaces is contained, monitored, compliant on a global basis by some framework. And it's worked with nuclear. As I say, we would have been long gone. And I think it can work going forward. And that also includes saying sometimes, as they did in NASA, instead of rushing to put a man on the moon and killing a bunch of astronauts on the way, they didn't kill one to get the guys there. It was a remarkable achievement of ethical, smart, sustainable engineering, science, and technology. And that's what we have to apply to AI, and we have to apply to biotech. And so I completely agree. We've got to move forward on tech. But sometimes that may mean, you know what, the driverless car is going to be so bloody disruptive. Let's give everybody a pause, wait 5 years, and retrain people. Maybe that's what we do. And so, you know, we need to know how to plan the future, and we need compliance, and we need a framework.
So, you've done your work standing. I suggest you both...
Do we arm wrestle now?
Yeah, well, take a spot close to each other.
Would you come over here, Diane, 1 second?
Yeah, we're going to do a selfie.
Get the selfie.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, that's great.
Okay, why don't you guys wait here and, yeah. I think you should sit next to each other.
Yeah.
Sure, of course.
Okay. All right, so now we have this panel of C3 commentators, critics, and cross-examiners. The first is Salim Ismail. Salim was the first executive director of the then nascent Singularity University, which is where I met him. He then went on to become a speaker, a writer, a consultant, trying to help various corporations around the world deal with disruption and possibly remake themselves as newborn exponential organizations. His technique is to first scare everybody to death, then he offers them a little tough love. This is Salim Ismail. Let's hear your comments on what has transpired.
Thank you, Moses. I'm very torn on this, which side of this to go on. Diane's kind of like an elder sister to me, and I'm godfather to Peter's kids, so where do you go with this? I want to make some comments around where we think this goes, though, and I want to lift up a level and talk about what's actually happening in the world and why the stress is there. We see this extraordinary pace of change with technology, and one way I frame it is, in the 15th century, we had the Gutenberg moment, and the printing press changed everything. I argue today we have 20 such Gutenberg moments hitting us at the same time. Just autonomous cars changes everything, right? Then you had blockchain, then you had solar, then you had AI, CRISPR, robotics, breakthroughs in neuroscience. We have never seen this before in the history of mankind. In the past, you had one technology accelerating, one big breakthrough. Just the Gutenberg moment took about 100 years for society to absorb it. And it was actually the most violent century following in the history of mankind. And so technology is moving, and it's going to break every institution. And part of the reason that Diane makes her points is that we can see every institution in the world breaking. All of the institutions, all the mechanisms that we use to run society, our civics, our politics, our legal systems, healthcare, education, all designed for a world a few hundred years ago, right? Not for today. Definitely not for 1 trillion sensors coming down the pike. We actually need to re-architect every single one of those. Let me give a couple of examples to bring the point home. Education. All of our education systems, pretty much globally, are designed to take a young child, train them through their early 20s to be ready for the existing job market. Right? Except we have no idea what a job looks like in 5 years. What are we teaching them? Right? That's a starting point. What we found at Singularity University is if you're doing today a master's degree in some of the topics that we cover, like advanced robotics or neuroscience or biotech, literally by the time you've finished your master's degree, you're out of date. So that's a structural issue. Our ability to teach the material can't keep pace with the changes in the material subject, in the subject area. Or you take religion. Most religions are designed to, the business model is to sell heaven. As we have life extension coming, what happens to the business model of most religions is going to be an interesting challenge. But most of them are based on absolute truths, assumptive truths that don't change, are designed not to change, and to keep society stable. Yet the world is moving very, very quickly. And we need to completely agree that we need to completely evolve our mechanisms and our regulatory structures. Exponential government is an oxymoron. Right? And so we have to fix these. Now, you take a couple more areas. Take the institution of marriage. I've made this comment a couple of times before. We invented marriage about 9,000 years ago. And when marriage first surfaced as an institution, average lifespan was about 25 years old. So you got married, you had kids, and you died. It is not an institution that is designed to last 50, 60 years. That is state-sanctioned torture, is basically what it is, right? We are about to double human lifespan, according to Peter. And so are you supposed to live with the same person for 100 years? It's really, this is the stress around it. Now, the problem that we have, and you could go on like this, and you see the stress in the world today across all of our institutions. Representative democracies, we invented that when information was scarce. If you're in Ottawa or Washington, D.C., you did not know what was happening in California or in British Columbia. The speed of a horse was as fast as you could find out. So you had a representative come and say, here's what my people are thinking. And of course, today we have an abundance of information that gets misused, misinterpreted, faked. Every major democracy in the world is broken. Right? India broken, Brazil is broken, the UK broke recently, the US breaking in front of our eyes. And you see the stress maybe the most today in fundamental movements in most religions. The orthodox element in almost every religion is freaking out, saying we can't take this pace of change. Let's go back to an older time when things were better. And to Peter's point, people would much rather be comfortable than happy. Right? And so we kind of ache for that kind of comfort level that it gives us to try and go back to an older time. And that's not really the answer either, because technology will not slow down. The big challenge we have as we try and update these institutions is we have to solve the amygdala problem, which Peter talks about, which is an individual level can somewhat be addressed with mindset, at the worst, generational change. But the real challenge, I think, is really at our institution levels or in our organizations or in society. If you try and attempt disruptive innovation or introduce new ideas, you get an immune system response, and the antibodies attack you. You try and update education, the teachers' unions go crazy. You try and update transportation, you have the fight between Uber and the taxis. Uber is successful by deliberately breaking the law, leapfrogging to public acceptance and waiting for policy to catch up. Right? Not very pleasant as a process, but you can't argue the success in that sense. And so we have to figure that part out. How do you update and rewire all of our institutions from the ground up? And that's the work I think we need to do. Because I tend to be very optimistic in the sense of a Ray Kurzweil kind of thinking. He once said that technology is a major driver of progress in the world. Maybe it's the only major driver of progress in the world. And now that we have a dozen technologies moving at kind of this incredible doubling pattern that we've never seen before, it's totally appropriate to be bubbly, excited, and fascinated by what comes along. Cancer will largely be handled in the next few years. Alzheimer's very shortly after that. The world has lived in a scarcity of energy for the entire history of society. We're about to have abundant energy. And to Peter's point, that allows you to have free desalinization. Free desalinization means clean water. Clean water means we take out 60% of the infectious diseases in the world. And so this is the opportunity we have. Diane makes a great point. Let's pause on autonomous cars. But in that 5-year pause, if we wait 5 years, 6 million people will die because we kill 1.2 million people in car accidents around the world today, about 34,000 people in the US. Maybe the weirdest and most fascinating statistic I've heard about autonomous cars, in the US, 50% of all legal court cases come from car accidents. 50%. So you automate the car, you take out all the lawyers. How can that be bad, right? That'll work out, that should work out really, really well. And I want to kind of close out on 2 points. One is, today we have some interesting capabilities to observe and study what's happening with technology. So we have systems like eBay, Craigslist, Kijiji, where we can actually study what is the actual ratio of people doing good versus bad. We kind of build our regulatory systems. We have laws and so on to try and protect people from the negative aspects of technology or from malintent. But on eBay, I can just as easily do a positive transaction as a negative one. Or same with Craigslist, same with Kijiji. So anthropologists and sociologists have studied these systems now to say, okay, here's an equal opportunity to do good or bad. What's the actual ratio? And the actual ratio turns out to be something like 8,000 to 1. So on eBay, there are 8,000 positive transactions for every negative. And if that's the case, we should take something like drones and let anybody do whatever they want with it. You'll get 8,000 positive use cases for every negative one. You can then police the negative, and society benefits incredibly. Instead, what we do is say, ban all drones, and slowly open that tap as technology pervades. And it takes far too long to get the benefits of these technologies. We already have evidence that if you drive the Tesla autonomously, more lives are saved because there are that many less accidents, that many less fatalities because of that. So we have a profound opportunity here to really embrace, but we have an obligation. I've lived all over the world. I'm actually Canadian, originally from India, and I think Canada has an incredible opportunity today with the practical thinking to really revamp and transform all of our institutions. We have diversity, we have creativity, and I think it's not even an opportunity. I think of it as an obligation. Because if you look at civilizations of the past, the Romans, the Incans, the Mayans, they all got to a specific level of complexity, hit a wall, and because they couldn't adapt, literally every single one of them crashed. And we're about to hit that wall today. We're just starting to push against the edges of it. And we have to figure out how to naturally cascade through and go through this big shift from scarcity to abundance in an elegant way. Otherwise, we have actually existential threat. So I lift above the two commentaries and I say, yeah, technology is a major driver. We cannot slow it down or stop it. We have to figure out how to manage it more elegantly. Thank you very much.
So next we have Rob Nail, who is CEO of Singularity University and is driving an intense program of worldwide expansion for the activities of that estimable new institution. However, as an educator, his views are a little more nuanced, and I want to read you a quote of his. He says, "Intellectual rigor requires that some of the blowback and collateral damage must be addressed with honesty and clarity." Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Moses. So somehow in my career, I continuously follow this cast of characters in various functions and roles, and it's really tough to see some of the things that they're here. Moses, this is for you. I think there's one very specific debater missing here, and if you haven't been reading the news, which Peter tries not to, IBM on Monday night had a little debate in San Francisco, and it was an AI debater, which is a pretty exciting new thing. Turned out that AI platform did quite well against some pretty notable debaters in this little format. So this time next year, Moses, it would be very interesting to have a debate about technology and humanity with technology. Right? Because, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Given the progress of AI, it means I'd be able to fire all of you.
We're all fired, exactly. We're all fired. Well, and that's a great point, because that strikes at our fear of technology. And IBM had to be very clear that their goal is not to fire everyone and replace us all. It really is about augmentation. These technologies are completely about helping us be more human and progress. And everything that you've heard from Peter and all the news you read, I would suggest nothing is different today than any other time. We humans have a unique capability to look at a problem and be driven to solve it. I think that's one of the most extraordinary things about humanity. And when faced with a problem, we invent a new solution, a technology, and we progress. Peter showed you the endless number of slides and evidence of how we've progressed as humanity. By every metric we have of progress, technology has helped us move forward. What's interesting is when that new technology comes online, we change our behaviors. We start acting different. Maybe our ethics and morals shift a little bit. And now we're faced with a whole new landscape, a new horizon of problems and challenges that need to be solved. And we look to the entrepreneurs and the inventors and the leading thinkers to come up with new ways to solve them. And hence the wheel continues to go. I do not think this is any different than how it's always progressed, and I do not think it will change anytime soon. What feels different is the pace is accelerating. We're talking about exponential technologies, which means our capability to adapt to how fast this wheel is turning is getting increasingly difficult. And so we need a different mindset to think about technologies, different tools and resources, and a different kind of network of how to make sure that it's going where we want it to go. Because as you've heard from Diane, this wheel can take us off some pretty steep cliffs. And we're definitely racing forward there in some interesting ways. I'm definitely concerned about our vision for the future, which is why I'm as passionate as I am about running Singularity University. The vision for the long-term future that we're creating, if you read the news and media or you watch a movie from Hollywood, the story of the future is increasingly a dystopian Hunger Games zombie apocalypse. Right? And I don't want that future, personally. And if we're bombarded with all of these new breakthroughs and news articles that basically say, hey, look, Amazon Go is going to destroy all retail jobs, period. End of story. We're left just terrified. And if we don't have a framework for actually looking at technology and forecasting where it's going and having any kind of sense that we know how to direct it, it leaves us in a deep sense of anxiety. And we end up making decisions out of this state of fear. I will suggest that the world is deeply reeling from a lack of a long-term positive vision of the future of abundance that we can create, and a framework for dealing with this accelerating pace of change. And so the rise of populism, Trump, Brexit, is a very natural result of making decisions out of fear. And we're going to see a lot more of that unless we can start changing the construct and a mindset around technology and articulate the long-term positive future that we could create, one of abundance. Now, one thing I will suggest, I'm concerned that that might not be possible. As you heard from Peter, our brain evolved over hundreds of thousands of years and drives us directly. Flight or fear, fight or flight responses to negative news, that's a really specific thing. But can we live in a world that it has abundance of resources and opportunities? Which is one I believe we can create. But can our human biology deal with that future of abundance? I would say the rise of obesity is a great example where we have an abundance of food in the US and many other countries, and we can't seem to deal with it very well. Right? There's the one example of abundance. And if you think about the massive changes we're about to endeavor, are we going to be able to adapt to them to create a positive future? And I'm not totally sure at the moment. I'm deeply concerned that we're on a path where we may just manifest that dystopian future because we have a lot of work and a lot of social and political courage to change every system that we're operating under to allow for a different future to arise. One of the interesting challenges we also have is the question about who's in control of these technologies. Peter has a great framing of looking at exponential technologies, the 6 Ds. As technologies become digitized, they're very deceptive and disruptive because they dematerialize, demonetize, and democratize products and services very quickly. So as technology is democratized, it means it gets in everyone's hands. It means CRISPR technology, genetic engineering of humans, is everywhere. The labs re-engineering human embryos are in the US, in Brazil, in China, and in Canada. You will find out. They're research. They're doing important research about the future of humanity. Exponential technologies are very hard to control because they're rapidly democratized. When you talk about the future of humanity, who controls it? Because the ethics and morality of China versus the US versus Canada versus the Middle East are radically different. Who decides? Singularity University's goal is to bring the world together, to have very important, critical conversations and productive ones with diverse global mindsets, looking at technology, looking far forward, and deciding how do we want to steer it. Thank you.
We're building up a little on that side of the couch.
I'm sorry. I didn't know which side I was on. Sorry, Moses.
And now, for something completely different, we're going to bring on stage Matthew Fisher. Matthew actually has been with us for the last couple of years, and he's different in the sense that he's one of the last foreign correspondents still working in Canada. He's reported from 162 different countries over 35 years, but a lot of his reporting has involved conflict zones, military matters, and that is his perspective that he's going to pursue right now.
Thank you, Moses, and thank you for having me here today. Listening to these extremely articulate people, I see merit in all of their arguments. Peter, there's an inevitability about the future. These things will happen because man grasps things and wants to go forward. I agree with Diane because we don't have systems to watch, also alluded to by another speaker. We don't have systems to watch over any of this. And what I'd like to be is sort of the canary in the coal mine in terms of warnings about the worst aspects, potentially, of artificial intelligence. And that is things like artificial intelligence-informed killer drones. The United Nations has a word for it. Their exact terminology is lethal autonomous weapons systems. So they have a term for it, but there are no guidelines, let alone rules, no international treaties governing anything to do with artificial intelligence and what it might mean in the military sphere. The UN has discussed this now for about 10 years and has got absolutely nowhere on it. And also, as you will know, even in Canada, there's no public discussion of such issues at all. I don't think Canadians are particularly aware that even in the last few months, Canada has created a cyber battalion within the Canadian Armed Forces. They are charged not only with defensive cyber warfare, but also they, if it is necessary, will be able to conduct offensive cyber warfare operations. It's not something that the public discusses at all. And of course, Canada is a very small player in all of this. The United States actually has a cyber command. It was created in 2009. It's now much, much larger. And then each of the branches of the US forces has it. And of course, China and Russia have very large cyber commands. I'm just trying right now to digest cyber warfare, and already we're moving on to artificial intelligence warfare. Over the last 20 years, the first time I even heard of drones was in 1999, and I literally heard one. I was in Kosovo, and overhead there were US surveillance drones. By the time I arrived 5 or 6 years later in Afghanistan, there were Predator drones followed by Reaper drones. The Canadians had Heron drones, so did the Australians. Those are built in Israel. And it was a totally different ballgame. I saw, at a guess, 500 killer drones take off from the Kandahar airfield. Maybe it was 1,000. I also saw the drones go up in the air that were hunting for bin Laden. And this had no AI component that I'm aware of, but it's to tell you that just in a very, very short period of time, we moved all this way, and now we're moving into artificial intelligence. Other speakers have referred to the fact that everything is moving so fast. Well, I can tell you it's moving that way too in warfare. The drones that carry out these attacks are flown by pilots at Creech Air Force Base in Nevada, just outside of Las Vegas. So when they carry out an attack in Yemen or in Iraq or in Afghanistan, it is fellows and women who go home and play golf or play with their kids 30 minutes after zapping people with a button with basically a very high-tech video game. When you add in the artificial intelligence component, it may make the system go on steroids. Right now, we don't only have drones that carry out these things, but we have drones now that refuel drones in the air. We have drones that are submarines that are being developed that will have no men aboard. There are ships with drones. I visited the high-tech establishment in Israel at the Tel Aviv airport, where they have maybe 50 different types of drones in a room, some as small as bumblebees. And their job is to go up and literally peer into rooms and listen to conversations and take photographs. Companies can use this, militaries can use this to see who's talking, who's meeting. And then, of course, there are the bigger drones. What happens when they are starting to deal with machines that are collecting massive amounts of data? The F-35 fighter jet is a fused system that has been developed so that 10, 20, 40 of them at the same time in the air will have all the information coming together in one point. Every pilot will see what all 30 or 40 other aircraft see at one time. Their whole idea in terms of defending the North American continent is that those aircraft will be over Canadian airspace doing these kind of things. And we have no framework yet to deal with a lot of these things. And questions that nobody really seems to be asking in the military sphere is, how is artificial intelligence going to fit in? Who is going to program these machines? Who's giving them orders? Right now, human beings still give the orders to the drones that are carrying out these activities. But what is it when these decisions are based on facial recognition and then computers crunching data and telling the drone to kill somebody? There'll be no sentimentality in the process. There's going to be no human bias. There's going to be no conscience. It'll be just pure mathematics that decides who lives and who dies. Millions and millions of dollars are being spent on this. Just in the past couple of weeks, artificial intelligence, from reading US sources, open sources, suggests that probably $500 million have been earmarked just in the past few weeks to concentrate on this. The reason the Americans are so interested, we heard this a bit in the Cold War about the Soviet Union, is that they're terrified that China is ahead of them. And now they want massive resources to go into this because of that reason. With everything happening so much faster, why do you need a human in the system? If the information that you're getting with thousands of different sources, you know, when I was in Afghanistan, I was watching what the drones had, and they could read license plates and they could read faces. Now, of course, we've heard what China is doing with things like facial recognition. Will it be at some point the machines that decide who should live and who should die? I would close by saying that one of the greatest American thinkers these days is the Defense Secretary, Jim Mattis, and he didn't believe in artificial intelligence having much influence in the sphere until earlier this year, when finally he changed everything in his own thinking when he said that he believed artificial intelligence is going to change the fundamental nature of warfare in the future. And we've got to think about this. The UN has to think about this. And believe me, the elephant in the room really is China. And China has to think about this, and it has been suggested they're operating right now outside the rules of law in the South China Sea and what they build up. And we must think about how we are going to talk to China about these things, because if we don't, things could get out of control in a big hurry, and maybe just machines programmed by the Chinese will be making decisions according to totally different moral ideas than the ones that we have. Anyway, thanks a lot.
So our next speaker is Ramona Pringle. Ramona actually has a little bit of history with IdeaCity. She was the host of a parallel online conference that we ran for many years. Thank you very much, Ramona.
My pleasure. It's nice to be back.
She's a professor at Ryerson University and also a commentator and columnist for the CBC these days.
Talking about these very issues.
Away you go.
These very complicated issues. Well, I can't compete with everything that we've heard. I'm impressed, I'm amazed by some of the things, I'm nervous about some of the things, but I think that the opportunity that I have in front of this crowd today is to be your representative, is to talk about this as a person, as a human, and really as an educator, this is my job. In my role as a columnist, a technology columnist, this is my job, is breaking down the hype and breaking down the tech jargon. So you'll see, I'm not the only one who brought their smartphone up on screen, but I am never very far away from this. And I imagine that that's true of most of the people in this room. So. Thanks. So let me just see, we'll use our paddles for a second, because I know we wanted to put those to good use. Let me see green if you own a smartphone. If there's anyone who, let's see red if you don't have a smartphone. Maybe that'll be easier to get a sense. So what we know is that there's definitely as many people who have 2 smartphones as there are people who have none in this room. In fact, there's over 2 billion cell phones around the world. There's more phones than there are people, which gives us a sense of where we're at. Now, because I always have my phone in my hand, I jokingly call myself a cyborg. We've outsourced this part of our brains. But in a sense, it's not that we're cyborgs, we're superheroes. And we talk about superheroes as being able to have superhuman strength or being able to have superhuman speed. We don't necessarily think about what's inside of these phones as superhuman, and yet, when's the last time you memorized a phone number? I will tell you, I don't know my husband's phone number because I had a smartphone when we met, and it's a piece of my brain that I don't need to use. I've outsourced it. Same thing with maps and with directions. And as we get more access to information and more access to these tools, we are becoming superheroes. And no wonder it is so engaging, so incredible to us as people. And this is really breaking it down. There's a conceptual conversation about the appeal and where we're headed and some of the concerns. But thinking about us and why we're using this is a really huge part to this conversation. Now, we are in this era of disruption, and the previous speakers have done a remarkable job of painting a picture of the world that we're in. But really, just in terms of this moment where we're at, there's Amazon stores that don't have clerks because they're entirely manned by technology. We've got companies from Uber to Tesla competing to bring self-driving cars to the market. When's the last time you used a travel agent, right? Kayak has already, and all the competitors have done an amazing job in terms of wiping out that whole field in terms of jobs. In Japan, there's a hotel, probably more novelty, but that's entirely manned by humanoid robots. So this is the era that we're in. But instead of talking about the technology, I want to talk about people. Now, all of this can be very scary, rightfully so. You know, we hear headlines, there's reports that say in the next 5 years, oops. Well, we'll get there. In the next 5 years, we're going to be seeing a tidal wave of disruption. And that's scary, right? That is the 40 to 70% in some industries job displacement that we're going to hear about. But that's happened before, right? That happened in the first industrial revolution. That's going to happen again with this new second machine age. And if we want to be optimists, there is an argument to be made that it frees us up to do some of the innately human things, to be more creative, to use our creative skills, but also empathy and compassion. You know we need more caretakers for the elderly. We need more nurses. Our classes have 30 to 40 students for every teacher. These are skills that we don't want robots doing, that we want humans doing, and we could use those humans. This is what we want to be retraining them for, is that which is innately ours. But when I talk about it being about people, this is also where I get nervous. You know, Peter said we demonize technology. I'm not scared of the technology. I'm scared of the people. I'm scared of the programmers. You know, every single time there's been a technology throughout history that has the capability of causing harm, we've used it to cause harm. So it's not really the technology that I want to focus on so much. I'm going to race through some of this because I know time is tight, and really what we want to get to is this conversation that's coming. But if I can share my approach to technology so that it helps you think about all of these issues, I like to zoom out and zoom in. You know, 10 years ago, when I started working as a professor, I used to get calls from the media saying, comment on this story, comment on that story. And it was always, you know, the new iPhone, the latest gadget. And I said, no, there's another story we need to be talking about. We need to be talking about how this is going to change our relationship with our tools, with each other, with the world around us. And that's what zooming out does. It gives us the bird's eye view. It lets us look back as we look forward. But we also need to zoom in, and this is what I'm hoping to do in terms of the representative of you in this room. What is the appeal of these devices? The appeal is not the gadget. It's not that shiny screen. If you have a child under the age of 1, I guarantee you that shiny screen is going to smash within a week of getting it, and unfortunately probably within a week of getting it repaired as well. The appeal is each other. Now, what's complicated about all of this is that we've got corporations that are cashing in on these innately human drives to connect and to become better versions of ourselves, to have more access to information, to have more access to each other. And that's where we get to this complicated, you know, Mark Zuckerberg said it, it's a complicated relationship that we've got with Facebook, with all of technology. Nothing is straightforward anymore. You know, there was this argument about abundance and obesity. Well, that again comes back to a people issue. You know, there's the abundance. The problem with obesity isn't an abundance of fruits and vegetables. It's an abundance of mass-produced, sugary, fatty foods that are in the easiest aisles to access, that are cheaper to buy than anything else. It's the decisions we make for ourselves, for our communities, that are really the problems. I'm going to keep skipping forward here, but again, another one of those issues, you know, when we talk about how we're merging with technology or how the inevitability isn't going to be people versus machines, there's more ethical issues that are going to arise. Everyone's been in grade school, and you know that if you didn't have the right kind of shoes or the right t-shirt, you would be made fun of. Well, what happens when there are kids who are able to see more clearly, who are able to have the tools to make themselves smarter or run faster? We're going to have brand new ethical considerations to be taken into account. My time is up, so I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. We're at a tipping point, and what I mean by that is I think everyone in this room understands all of this. Certainly the polls that were taken show that people are concerned about all of these issues. The first era, let's call it social media, digital media 1.0, was all sorts of promise. It was connecting with each other, it was sharing our photos. But the second era, 2.0, it's the teenage years, it's the awkward years. We're seeing some of those growing pains, and some of the issues that are coming up range from mundane to very severe in terms of, you know, what do you do after a breakup and those memories are still there? Do you delete your own history when it's publicly available, to what happens when you've got corporations meddling in elections? What happens when you've got something like YouTube live broadcasting a rape or a murder? These are problems that we don't have answers to yet. We're also at a time where all of this is being monetized. So those eyeballs that are watching those videos are being harvested for dollars, for ad dollars, for dollars from really ultimately anyone who will pay. Your information is now the world's most profitable commodity. Then we get to robots and ethics. So it's not just data and it's not just the social media world, but as we were just hearing, when it comes to AI, I gotcha, I'm wrapping up. When it comes to AI and militarized AI, it's really scary. You know, if you hear about the idea that there's guns that will be able to shoot themselves and it makes you nervous, you should be scared, rightfully so. This has been in the headlines recently because Google just said that they're coming out with their own code of ethics. But unfortunately, this is a phenomenon that we see over and over and over, whether it's Google or Amazon or Facebook, as they can come up with these grandiose statements of how they will do no harm and how they follow certain ethics, but there is no outside accountability. And so if they're the only ones watching over themselves, well, it's questionable accountability. Ultimately, my stance is we have these tools that empower us, but we need to be empowered. It is power to the people. We are the ones who are making these machines, and we really need to be conscious of the power that we've got working alongside them and making these decisions right now. As everyone has spoken about in all of the presentations, technology advances exponentially, which means the last 10 years can't prepare us for the next 2 even. So this is the moment to be pulling some of that power, to be, whether it's voting dollars or our eyeballs online or our spending dollars, making very serious decisions about the tools that we use and who we're giving that power to.
Well done.
Thank you.
So our next speaker is Sasha Grujicic, and I thought he was a necessary presence here because underlying this discussion, and particularly the part of it that I believe makes most of us feel uncomfortable, is this dirty little secret, advertising. Because the business model for these companies that we're now beginning to be apprehensive about is based in advertising. And I put it to you as a challenge, Sasha, that they wouldn't be collecting all of this data if you and your industry weren't buying it.
Oh, thanks. Yikes. Okay, I didn't realize I'd have to defend the whole advertising industry on this. I wasn't even going to talk that much about defending the advertising industry, but we'll come on to that, I'm sure. So this is a really, really confusing conversation. I think it's a very complex conversation for a variety of different reasons. I have a couple of questions for Peter and Diane, just because we were asked to develop those questions while we listen to you guys speak. So one question I have with regards to in a future of abundance, Peter, and the erosion or the elimination of scarcity, where does economic value go?
It goes away. We're heading towards a post-capitalist society. The fact of the matter is we're rapidly demonetizing the cost of living. We talk about power. You know, last year, coal was 5 to 6 cents per kilowatt hour. In Mexico, it was, solar was 2.7 cents. In Dubai, it was 2.4 cents. In the next 10 years, will be sub 1 penny. We don't charge ourselves for oxygen. We're going to get to a point at the end of the day where we're not charging for electricity. We are seeing the fact that an autonomous electric car will be on the order of 5 times cheaper than owning a car. We're rapidly demonetizing the cost of transportation. If you can take an Uber Elevate, which is an Uber aerial ride share, Your incremental cost of your car costs you 49 cents per mile. That's something that's bigger than a kilometer for all of you. An Uber Elevate ride is expected to be at 44 cents, which means you could live 100 miles away and commute in, but get the same size house for 1/3 the price. We are continuously demonetizing the cost of living. We don't realize we have millions of dollars of free stuff on here we think nothing about. Go back 20 years ago and try and buy all the stuff on here, two-way video conferencing equipment, high-definition video, still cameras, millions of dollars. We are demonetizing the cost of living. We're going towards a post-economic.
So I get what you're saying there, but who's going to invest in that future where you're having a completely strongly deflationary force on economies and a demonetized force? Not to mention, we don't even talk about the deflationary force of information technologies on industries. That's something we just decide to gloss over. So when you start to put things onto an information technology foundation where you have literally no abundance, or you have total abundance because it costs you nothing to replicate information, you can just copy and paste it. Hang on one sec. Because this is supposed to be a debate, and I have a bunch of German philosophy I want to get to in a second, but this to me feels much more important. So what happens is you deflate economies, you deflate industries, you deflate the newspaper industry, you deflate publishing industry, you deflate the media industries. Why? Because scarcity goes away. Why is that important? Because scarcity contributes economic value. Without economic value, you're not able to fund things. You can't fund the future. I love this, by the way. This drives me crazy. Whenever it goes, look at how smart we are with technology. Look at how brilliant people are in inventing things and the big giant companies that come as a result of this. Why don't you go, we need to do a little bit of research and figure out where all those technologies come from. They come from governments. They come from government funding, public spending that invest billions and billions and billions of dollars into the development of these things. Then we take them out into the commercial domain and we go, look at how brilliant businesses are. Let's put our faith in the hands of businesses. It's a tough discussion. It's a tough debate, and one that's incredibly complex because the ethics aren't there. The ethics are fundamentally not there. But the hard part is who gets to decide, who gets to control that debate, and who gets to decide what's going on. I want to make the quick argument that we actually don't really understand what technology is, but more importantly, we don't know what technology does. Because I think we're actually having a crisis of truth, we're having a crisis of values, and a crisis of willful ignorance. This is an existential crisis, but it's based on human foundations, not based on technology. But there's a lot of hope that comes as a result of technology. So I'm going to explore a little bit about that for a couple of minutes before we dive into the broader discussion. The first insight I want to borrow actually comes from a 20th century German philosopher. I told you I was going to talk about philosophy. And he was an existentialist, so his whole premise was existence precedes essence, meaning you come into the world and you define or understand what your essence is as a result of living it. And he was incredibly interested in the role of technology in all of this. And he had a fundamental insight about what technology does to us at the individual level. He says, where technology is applied, truth is revealed. And what he's getting at is the nature of technology in the way it interacts with us in our humanness. It forces us to make choices. It forces us to order things in a particular way. And those choices and that ordering forces us to reveal what our truths are. Or put another way, what our values are. And through that application, our truth becomes revealed to us. And those truths are really, really important in understanding kind of what we can do about the growth in this existential crisis. Do you value things like openness, abundance, and empowerment? Do you value things like control, monetary gain, or scarcity? Because these values, they're mutually exclusive. You can't have them both because you need to make choices through technology. And it forces us to reveal our inner values and our inner truths in that application. But that's only the subjective reading, right? That's the subjective reading of the role of technology and its impact on us. The second insight I'm going to bring is from our own Marshall McLuhan. He coined the term, the medium is the message. The unintended consequences that come as a result of the application and mass adoption of technology is actually what mattered. It's not the technology itself. The fact that we invented the automobile, yes, is a great invention. However, it changes the nature of our neighborhoods. The fact that we've digitized our economy fundamentally transforms not only that economy, but the society that comes around it. Because we shape our technologies, and in turn, our technologies shape us. Technology, in the case of McLuhan, is telling us more about us on aggregate as a society than it is about the piece of technology itself. It's actually a great mediator of society. We're short on time, and Peter already stole some of mine. It's totally cool. But I would just say that technology is actually scarcity, my friend, scarcity. It has value. I would just say this. I'm going to close with this and just say technology is actually one of the most transformative, powerful, and insightful tools that we have in our society. In its essence lies the truth about ourselves, but then also about the way in which we relate to one another. It's bound up in our economy. It's bound up in our personal identity. It's intertwined in our society and our politic. Use it with care. Use it with purpose. Pay attention to the truths that are being revealed to you when you're applying and using technology. And think about the unintended consequences you create by using that technology. That is what lies at the heart of this debate, not the technology itself. The ignorance of what technology is and what it does is the most dangerous thing that we face today. But it's the knowledge of what it carries that also provides the greatest hope. Thank you.
I'll get back to you on that other matter, though, when we sit down to have this conversation. So, Jim Harris's turn. Jim Harris is also a consultant and also concerns himself with the problems of disruption. But given that his focus is business, what's unusual and what I want you to understand about his background is that he was also the founding president of the Green Party of Canada. Unusual.
What an amazing debate we've had to launch IdeaCity this year. I'm going to be talking about artificial intelligence as it relates to autonomous vehicles. 94% of car accidents are due to driver error. So in 10 years' time, when the only new car you can buy is an autonomous vehicle, an AV, think about the 40,000 lives in North America, US and Canada, that will be saved every year. Think about the 2.5 million people who won't be maimed. Think about Humboldt. Think about the tragedies that families are spared. That's the great news. But if you sell auto insurance, you're going to witness a $500 billion a year market disappear. Now, I'm going to play you a little video, and this is from the dash cam of a Tesla in a Scandinavian country. And the AI, the autonomous system, will send off an audible alarm. Watch when you hear that if you can see anything wrong. That just told me in 15 seconds what the value of an autonomous system is. What is your family worth to you? Now think about the implications of this. Who's going to go buy a used car that doesn't have an autonomous system for your kid in 10 years' time? I mean, the kid is 16. She's bugging you after all. But you raised her. Right? What happens to the value of used car lots that sell cars that don't have autonomous features? Now, I was working with a series of executives at a group called Tech, and we have many Tech members here today. It's a peer group of executives that meet monthly. Great organization. And one Tech executive said to me, Jim, I have 16 car dealerships, and I just want to tell you that AVs and EVs, electric vehicles, are less than 1% of the market, so they'll have no impact on my business. So I put these next slides in the deck after the break, just because I'm a kind of nice guy. So here we have large luxury car sales in the US in 2014, and Mercedes is king of the castle. But already the Tesla Model S is number 2. Fast forward to 2015, oops, Tesla has fallen back. Or sorry, Mercedes has fallen back, Tesla has accelerated. 2016 disappeared. It was a bad year. Can I get my slides back? Oh, there we go, thank you. So 2016, Tesla races ahead, further collapse for Mercedes. In 2017, Tesla's off a little bit. That's because people are buying the Model X in the SUV category that isn't captured here. Now, I want to give you a little simple fact. 10 years ago, Lexus was 2% of Toyota's unit volume in North America and 50% of its profit. Can you hear the huge sucking sound as Tesla strips profitability out of the auto industry? Do you think you can comfortably say, because it's less than a 1% trend, I can ignore it? And it's not just in North America. So here's North America. How bad does it have to be before you say uncle and recognize that change is happening? It's not just in North America. Really, this adds insult to injury. In Germany, the #1 large-selling luxury car is Tesla, beating out Mercedes and BMW on its own home turf. That's gotta hurt. Ouch. It's not just Germany, it's all of Europe. You know, last year GM sold 10 million cars, and 2 days ago, it was valued at close of trading at $63 billion. Tesla, 2 days ago, was valued at $58 billion, and it sold 100,000 cars. So doing the math on this, GM's being valued at $6,300 for every car it makes, and Tesla's being valued at $580,000 for every car it makes. That's a 2x4 to the head of GM executives to get serious about electric vehicles. And they now begin the 8-year development process to bring out sexy EVs from GM. Do you see a problem here? Our organizations are far too slow to change with the times. And you know, in the debate about AI, do we want to save 40,000 people from being killed and 2.5 from being maimed?
Inconceivable!
For all you Princess Bride fans. So think about the $200 billion a year market for auto repair. What happens to it? Think about car rental companies. I never rent a car anymore. I use Lyft or Uber, and Lyft is now here in Toronto. People like it even better than Uber. You know, what happens to the value of car rental companies? And if we take 2.5 million people out of the mix just on North American roads from being killed or maimed every single year, do we have an overcapacity of ambulances? Is this bad news for ambulance makers? Or is it good news for us not getting maimed? And in New York City and Manhattan, it takes 2.4 minutes using an Uber to get to an emergency room. It takes you 10 minutes using an ambulance. If you're having a heart attack or a stroke, do you think those minutes matter? Are you going to debate the AI deployment of Uber cars, or are you going to get to the hospital? You know, and do we have an overcapacity of emergency room capacity if we're taking 2.5 million people out of the mix? Are hospitals going to have to change? And we heard about lawyers already. We love them so much. What happens to personal injury lawyers when there's no more whiplash? The poor lawyers. And people say to me, Jim, I love driving. I get it. If you're in a Maserati doing switchbacks on the Amalfi Coast, I get it. But if you're in stop-and-go traffic in Toronto, Where's the joy of that? You're either burning out your knee or you're burning out the clutch in your Maserati, right? We waste $6 billion a time in traffic. Couldn't we do something better with that? So in 10 years' time, when you drive to work, you'll drive to work, but you'll be in the back seat, you'll be writing a report, Skyping with your grandchildren, reading, sleeping. And when you arrive at work, you're going to say to your vehicle, go forth and earn your keep. You're going to put it into Uber or Lyft's autonomous pool to make money while you're working rather than paying $40 a day in the downtown financial core for parking. So what happens to the value of parking lots? Good time to short the parking lots. But McKinsey says that we have 61 billion square feet too much of parking in the US. How are we going to redeploy that for cities? And if your company is primarily paving parking lots, what happens to you? So 4% capacity, that's how much, 4% utilization at 20% capacity. That's what we use our cars. It is just begging to be disrupted. And every car that's in Lyft, Uber, AutoShare, Zipcar, Car2Go eliminates 12 to 30 people buying a car. Reason for the range is Barcelona is very different ratio than Toronto. Innisfil is using Uber as its public transit. Which would you rather do? Go stay out when the polar vortex is drunk and visiting us, in -20, waiting for a bus, hopefully, or have a vehicle pull right up to your front door, saving taxpayers money and providing better service? What happens to the $153 million of parking revenue for Toronto, or New York City's $2 billion in fines, right? What happens to the gas tax if we're all EVs? $13 billion for federal and provincial governments. When you add the GST, it's $15 billion. What happens if nobody's buying new cars? What happens to the revenue for government for HST? Now, you're thinking, you're going on and on, Jim. Yada, 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 I don't believe it. So here we have New York City. Moses is saying, you're going on and on, Jim. Here's New York City in 1900, and if you look closely, you cannot see a single car, not one car. 10 years later, you cannot see a single horse. And we know how much better, from a sanitary point of view, not having all that horse manure is. So before you get too worried, think about this. We just had our sesquicentennial, 150th anniversary. And 150 years ago, 80% of jobs were in agriculture. Today, it's less than 2%. We survived farm automation. So if you want, this article is all up in the bookstore. And do I look A, sinister? B, very sinister? Or C, demonic? I don't know. So I'm looking forward to this debate.
Okay, so a couple hundred years ago, Hobbes talked about a war of all against all. I'm hoping to see that replicated here. Who wants to take the first strike? Maybe I should do that, because I too have my views on this matter, and I thought I'd project that on screen. If you could have a look at this video. I think this is the thing that creeps people out most.
We know that Google is tracking us. We agree to it when we set up our phones. So we wanted to figure out what exactly Google is learning about us throughout the day. So here's what we're going to do. We have two identical phones. The only difference between these two phones is this one is in airplane mode. Both of the phones lack a SIM card, and they haven't been set up to access any Wi-Fi networks. So for all intents and purposes, these phones have no connection to a data network. We're going to keep them with us throughout the day. And while I travel around DC, we're going to figure out just what Google is finding out about me.
Our first stop, Sim's convenience store, just outside our Fox Bureau, for a quick coffee. From there, we took a walk to the Capitol and took a quick walk around the Senate office buildings, and then decided to hop in a car and head around town.
Hello. We're going to the Children's Hospital, please.
To run our tests, we had to do more than walk the block, so we took a tour around our nation's capital. First, due north to the Children's National Medical Center Hospital, then west to St. Albans School and the National Cathedral. Our tour around town was a 14-mile journey that lasted more than an hour. The entire time, the phones had no access to the internet.
Oh my goodness.
Not a Wi-Fi connection and not any cellular data service. It almost seemed quaint to assume that Google wouldn't even be able to collect data on me.
Let's head back to the bureau, my friend. Oh, that church is beautiful.
Google's business model is simple. Collect data on its users and then use that data to sell targeted ads. It's a business model called surveillance capitalism. But does that critical data collection work even when your phones aren't connected?
So we're back here at our Fox Bureau in DC, and we've got both of our phones exactly how we left with them. The only difference, really, I snapped a couple of bad selfies at the National Cathedral. But otherwise, they have stayed in my pocket for the entire day. So let's find out what they know. This is our man-in-the-middle device. It's basically a Wi-Fi network that these phones are going to connect to once we turn their Wi-Fi on. It's going to pass data through it on the way to Google. But on the way, we're actually going to get a copy of the same data that Google's going to get. We'll be able to decrypt it and then find out where we've been throughout the day.
Within minutes, the numbers rolled in. The phone that wasn't on airplane mode registered more than 100 locations, 130 activities, and even 152 barometric readings. As soon as it hooked up to our Wi-Fi, it transmitted 300 kilobytes of data straight to Google. The phone even logged our exact locations, tracking us all around town, the Capitol, the hospital, the school, and the cathedral.
Now you may notice what's missing here is the exact route that we took, but it got that data too. It knows when I got out of the car.
The metadata has a time log down to the very second, tracking everything when they think that you're walking, riding, and yes, even getting out of the car.
Okay, so you're thinking, this isn't a big deal. I'll just put my phone in airplane mode. Yeah, we thought of that too. This is the other phone that we had with us that no SIM card also remained in airplane mode the entire time. Let's see what kind of data it captured.
The phone with airplane mode activated actually logged more locations and activities than the other phone, and it also transferred hundreds of kilobytes of data to Google as soon as it was activated.
The only thing that's missing from this map is our stop at the Children's Hospital, but it still knows we were there. There it is. Exiting vehicle, 100% accuracy.
Through complicated user agreements and free software, Google gets users to sign away their privacy for nothing. They're even following you in the places that most people would expect total privacy: government buildings, a children's hospital, a private school, a church. Every move you make, every step you take, Google is watching you.
We were sent this picture by a viewer who lives and works in the city of San Francisco. It shows the sidewalk outside his office littered with, by our count, more than 30 syringes and other drug paraphernalia. This is not in some abandoned lot or underneath the freeway overpass. It's right outside the offices of Spotify, a top tech company in downtown San Francisco. It's right across the street from WeWork. It's 1 block away from Zenres. These are all tech companies, and 3 blocks from tech giants Twitter and Uber. These are some of the richest companies in the richest industry in the richest city in the United States, and their employees work in a circus of trash and drugs. And the question is, do elites even care? And the answer, of course, is no, they don't.
So these are 2 images that, well, they've stayed with me, and really they motivated this debate. I happened to be in San Francisco last year and was attending a great conference that amounted to really a prosperity gospel revival meeting. And then I stepped outside and I saw exactly the same thing. I thought maybe it was localized, a poor part of the city and so on, but that wasn't the case. It was widespread throughout the city, and I posed myself the same question that the guy on the video asked, which is the richest companies in the richest city in the richest country in the world, and somehow no ability to deal with this. I then remembered that, to my surprise, I had recently seen an article on universal income, on guaranteed universal income, coming not from some left-wing party or some left-wing ideologue somewhere, but in fact from one of the captains of technology industry, and it struck me. Yes, these guys privatize the profits, but they want to socialize the costs. And where is the responsibility? Where is the accountability? Debate among yourselves. One last thought, and that is, for a long time in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War and throughout the Cold War during the 50s, 60s, well into the 70s, we thought that the world would end in some kind of thermonuclear holocaust, that we might suffer a boot in the face. You know, we saw the serried ranks of the totalitarian regimes marching in their May Day parades. And it turns out now that maybe our demise may come on little cat's feet, that in fact entertainment is a more effective tool for social control than coercion, because the comforts and the conveniences of these new technologies have motivated all of us to turn over our information, to turn over our opinions, to turn over our habits without, it appears, a second thought. So that is my contribution to the debate, Peter.
Can I ask, just since we have the advanced technologies of those paddles, can I ask a couple of questions of the audience? Please. All right, so my first question is a simple one. Green for promise, red for peril. Technology, promise, or peril?
Okay, well, now, who can read that color?
I would say, what, 15%?
Maybe one at a time. Let's do one at a time. So,
no, the contrast is what gives me the...
yeah?
Okay, I'd say, yeah, 90% is promise. So here's another question. I'm going to fill my question of you guys. So if you could stop technology today, or at its current, or keep it advancing, how many folks would like to stop technology today, put up a red, keep it advancing, put up a green? Wow.
Even more.
So that's like 95, 97% keep it going. All right, cool.
Can I just
Can I
jump
ask
in?
a question? Please. How many people believe we need global framework around these technologies, just as we did with nuclear? Green for yes, red for no. Okay, it's 90% yes.
And another question, how many think that will actually happen?
Sasha, you wanted to make a point.
Yeah, so I just want to draw some discussion out here. So I think there was a research study, and God, I can't remember who did it, but it was like a longitudinal study that took place over a couple hundred years. I want to say like anywhere between 200 and 500 years, that evaluated technological development and adoption among societies. And this, it wasn't Kevin Kelly. It's a different research study. It was a very comprehensive. It looked at the global cultures, global societies, who invented the technology, how quickly was it deployed and adopted en masse. And the lion's share, I'd say upwards of 95%, excluding some Soviet Union inventions, came out of capitalistic countries, right, that used growth-oriented and debt-oriented economies to generate kind of wealth and deployment and adoption of technologies. And I think that's what kind of sits at the heart of the debate with regards to technologies and promise and peril, is what trade-offs are we willing to make? Are we willing to make trade-offs that say, hey, I can retarget or advertise to your particular location because I think you'd be interested in a Home Depot when you're searching for a compressor for your your backyard piece of kit, or do you want total anonymity and not have that opportunity and deal with the kind of the slowing of progress? So to me, that kind of is where a lot of the work that we do, that's where it's centered, which is how do you start to create win-win scenarios whereby you're not necessarily compromising people or fundamental ethics, but don't slow down the pace of growth? Because I don't know if we can get to a post-capitalistic society based on the way in which that our economies run, because it's mostly it's debt and speculative investment that drives a lot of this technological growth.
Your point is, if we lose the capitalism, you lose innovation.
I would say in the most part, yes.
So let me finish the second part of the time I stole from you. In the scarcity-minded, we have all afternoon, right?
We do.
We do. Okay, good.
We've canceled break.
So one of the things that frames my thinking is boundary conditions. What are the actual boundary conditions, the fundamentals here, and where we're heading is towards a world, and we can frame it in a 20, 40, 50-year time frame, but it's not more than, probably, in my mind, 30 years, where, and this is enabled by nanotechnology, the work that Eric Drexler and that Eric Drexler popularized, is that we're heading towards a world where effectively energy, information, and materials drive everything. If I have a nanobot that can rearrange atomically precise matter, and I say replicate yourself, 300 times, nobody gets one, that nanobot, I can toss it into the soil and say, build me a Tesla, and it might say, I need some extra lithium, can you get it? And everything comes down to energy, raw material cost, and information. And that is the boundary conditions to which we're heading. And I see that. That is our dematerialization, demonetization, democratization push. This is what technology is driving us, and we're moving very rapidly towards a nanotechnology world. We don't hear about it, but the work is happening on schedule, right what Ray has predicted. The second thing I think is important is that this entire push is heading towards a world where every child can have a world. You can't have a world of scarcity and a world of abundance at the same time. You're either going to restrict things to drive scarcity, but if you do that, that means that you're depriving 8 billion people of the world of abundance that they could have. And I think it's a choice society has to make, though I don't think any of this stuff can be stopped. I think the genie's out of the bottle. You can't regulate against any technology. We live in a world of porous borders. If you tell me I can't do it here in Canada, I'll go to South Korea or China. And so the technology fronts we have are moving irregardless. To one of the points you made, I remember when I was in medical school, I was doing genetic research, when the whole recombinant DNA activity came out, the government did not regulate against recombinant DNA. What they did was they pulled all of the leaders together into what were called the Asilomar conferences, and they said, figure it out yourself. And they ended up coming up with their own guidelines. And I think that's ultimately in AI, in all these fields, we need the leaders to self-regulate. Government's not going to do it.
Yeah, and if I could just extend what I said and what you're saying is that I like to go back to Oppenheimer, who quoted from the Hindu Bible when he saw the mushroom cloud for the first time. And he said, I am the God of destruction and creation. And he thought, oh, good heavens, what are we going to do? So he spent the rest of his life, not in guilt, but in doing something about it. What has to happen, we've had the Alamar Conference on Life Sciences. We had a wonderful gathering on an island. Ray Kurzweil was there, I think you were there. I want to see that technology and engineering and scientific geniuses do an Oppenheimer and say, we're going to make sure there is a framework, we're going to set out the guidelines, and we're going to try and lobby every important government and institution into making sure these people are permitted and compliant and observed. And that's the way it has to happen.
Peter, I thought your dissertation on the collapsing price of energy was interesting, and it's a beguiling future. But, we just had an election in this province where we threw out of office a party that had been in power for 15 years, reduced that party to a rubble, to 7 only members, because they had allowed, in pursuit of the ideology of environmentalism, the price of hydro to soar, so that there were pensioners in our province who had to choose between heat or food. So it may be coming, it may be like communism on the horizon, but in the meantime, there's a lot of pain, and the problem is how to get there from here.
I'm going to jump in a bit with the empowerment side of this, because there's a bit of, and I'm a huge proponent of technology, but I think that there's a bit of a myth around this idea of empowerment, and there's a bit of false empowerment. I don't think we need to slow down innovation or slow down technological growth, but I do think that these people who are supposedly empowered need to know a little bit more about what they're signing up for. You know, whether it's the terms of service that you scroll through that is tiny font, when, you know, these are design issues, they're communication issues. You're a communications legend, but that's where I think regulation could step in, is not to stop what's going on, but just to make sure that the people who are using these tools understand what they're using and have some ability to opt in or opt out. And we're seeing a little bit of progress. There's a lot of, that's what we're starting to see in Europe. And there's been a lot of pushback against it, but that's, I think, that is the direction that we need to move in. I don't think that the people who want to be cautious want to slow down innovation in any way, but if you're not going to give people that, if you're not going to truly empower them, these great, amazing tools aren't truly going to be that empowering.
My question is, do we have to pay the price of a surveillance society in order to achieve the scientific breakthroughs? Are they linked? Do we have to accept that the news business, the newspaper business, the magazine business have been devastated by a massive movement of revenues from old legacy broadcasting, as an example, because advertisers have this thirst for pinpoint knowledge because they think they can sell more stuff? And do you, it's unfair to ask you to represent the entire industry, but does the industry accept any responsibility, because it is unseen in this process? I remember in the good old days when television was king and we used to be criticized for the programming, and people looked at the broadcaster and blamed the broadcaster for the programming that they thought was immature or juvenile or stupid or whatever, and never saw that behind the broadcaster was an advertiser demanding those demographics and those psychographics which led to that programming. We're now in a similar situation where ad money has been siphoned entirely out of all the media that we're aware of and is in pursuit of that kind of surveillance information.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some, just to be clear, there are constraints and limitations in terms of what information you have access to from any advertiser's perspective. It's more restrictive in Europe and in Canada, less restrictive in the United States. I think from an advertising perspective, I think the outcomes are better relevance, better targeting, better kind of resonance, so that I'm not trying to communicate with you on behalf of a brand or a company that has absolutely nothing, absolutely no relevance or connection to you. Or, if you had just purchased a car, like, why would I be trying to sell you another car? So I think those intentions that are kind of feed into the back of that. I think the one challenge that we've had, and this is the deflationary point that I brought up earlier, was we don't have a solution for the analog dollars to digital dimes transformation. And what you end up having in this kind of abundant world of media and information is a huge deflationary force on the amount of money it costs for you to reach millions and millions of people. So, of course, it's in our interest from an advertising and from a marketing perspective to drive efficiencies for, the number of people that you can reach on behalf of that advertiser, but it has a huge consequence to the publishing industry, to the media industry, to the streaming industry. And I think that's a fundamental business crisis that we face. And I think that incompatibility of information and technology-based industries and innovation and how they compete or connect with traditional models of business, but then also just on human systems. I mean, Salim talks a lot and works a lot with folks about understanding how those things interact. That's the rub. The outcome of it is that it accelerates and scales like so quickly now. And that's why I think the crisis lies at the values level. It's because it's an ideological accelerant. That's why you have people that are reaching for simplified solutions or political identities.
We are actually starting to figure it out. For the last few thousand years, the world ran on scarcity. If you didn't have scarcity, you didn't have a business. All our organizational structures are top-down hierarchical structures for command and control, so that if you have resources, you hoard it, et cetera, et cetera. But we're finding now in a kind of an age of abundance, these new, what I call exponential organizations are finding business models around abundance. Airbnb's tapping into an abundance of extra bedrooms lying around, same with Uber, same with Waze, and we're starting to get there. It's taking a long and a slow, arduous time, long time to do it. The problem that I think we have is we're running out of time to transition our legacy systems into a new environment, and that stress is literally breaking pretty much every organization and institution we can see. I think it's a fundamental failure of leadership. Our leadership in the world today, globally, especially on the political side, is unable to articulate this positive message of abundance that's very real and very data-driven. And then we go back to the fear factor, and you end up in the mess that we're in today.
Peter, you wanted to add?
I was going to go to a separate subject we touched on, which is, I'm just curious, how many folks here still believe they have privacy? If you could, green for privacy, red for no privacy. So that's an entire audience of red, which is pretty amazing, right? And I do believe privacy is dead, long since dead. So the question becomes, is that a good or a bad thing? Radical transparency lets me sleep better at night, right? It's much harder to do things evil. And I would posit that, in fact, privacy is a rather recent invention of society. It wasn't necessarily a belief that existed in hundreds or thousands of years ago. But it's still going, right? In China, the technology exists to recognize an individual's face in 1.3 seconds. A single autonomous car generates 750 megabits of data per second in ultrasound and LiDAR driving down the streets. We're being imaged all the time, everywhere. So that's going to be changing things, and the ad agency.
You accept this with a shrug? I'm carrying this article that
I accept
Diane
this as a trade-off with, I still want privacy as everybody else does, for God's sakes. I don't want people reading my texts or my emails and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, I'm not going to be naive and believe that it hasn't been lost.
Can I just add to that the privacy debate vis-a-vis social media is not about tech, it's about a business model called freemium. It's about giving you a service and not really telling you until now how they're able to provide all these services to you for nothing. So the trade-off is quite simple. It's what Europe is doing. They're saying, you sign on for Facebook, but you're going to be able to see exactly where your data goes, or you can say, I don't want you to have my data, and you're not denied the service. That's the answer. Or you go to a subscription model where people will pay for Facebook, and then they're taking responsibility for themselves. And their privacy won't be abrogated because they're paying for it. So it's a business model. It's not a tech argument, really. It's a silly social media business argument, and they've gotten away with murder.
I've been trying to read this quote into the record because it's yours, Diane. It says, the dirty little secret about Facebook, Inc., Alphabet, Inc., and other tech companies is that their business model is unethical. It is a combination of espionage and propaganda.
Yep.
And I want to see if I can get you people to join me.
You have a choice. You don't have to sign on. Or you sign on to a new service that may spring up, that subscription. Or you demand that your privacy is respected. And if you're European, you can do that.
I just want to finish this thought. I've had this flood of interventions in stuff that I've been reading on the internet, which somehow prevent me from continuing to read unless I push a button that confirms that I've read the back end of this enormous, illegible, indecipherable.
That's because of the European changes, which are imposed on all the multinationals. So they know it may be coming, or they have to just do it. They just do it all across the world.
But
so we're doing
nobody reads that back end,
of course
and
not.
you keep punching the button.
They're covering their...
What?
They're covering themselves.
They are, but it means that this so-called solution that is in support of the consumer is not a real one.
Well, sure it is. Read it, and it's simplified
Yeah,
from
and
what it was.
how many of you are irritated like I am? You know those little pop-up things at the bottom of the screen?
Yeah.
The little transparent pop-ups
Yes.
with an X in the corner that you have to be a newborn baby with tiny fingers in order to be able to hit. And of course, most of the time you don't hit that X and you get the ad. I'm looking at you, Sasha. And when you do hit the X, guess what happens? Up comes another little screen and it says, why don't you like this ad? And it offers you a bunch of little choices, and when none of them really apply, you hit it again, and up pops another little screen which said, this ad closed by Google, but the transparent overlay remains. That's the world we're in.
It's because we're trying to get you what you want, right? But nobody's come up. So here's the thing, right? But I mean, this is the thing. Like, you want the article, right? You want the article. You don't want to pay for it. Nobody's come up with a better business model. We're here to try to service not only your business as Zoomer and in the publishing industry, but service your interest for content. And we're trying to do it in as clean and transparent a way. And I think Google and Facebook and GDPR, which you reference, are all helping. They're absolutely helping.
And what's really creepy is they will, and they have, the advertisers will buy the names and identity of people who have been hitting on chat rooms because they're depressed to sell them antidepressants.
That's totally fake. That's totally not
Totally.
right. You can't do that.
You
can't do that.
Until it was publicized, you could do that.
If we could let Peter finish, and then I know you're going to
Forgetting
try to get it.
about the miracle we live in. Oh my God. The fact that you can go onto your phone and find out any fact on the planet with Google for free. Holy shit. That's amazing. Yep. That is amazing. Why do we think it should be free? And if I think about a company that has actually impacted the world in the most extraordinary, positive way by orders of magnitude beyond anything else, it's Google. It may not be Facebook, but Google has transformed the entire planet orders of magnitude in incredible ways. And it costs us no money. Are we so naive as to think we shouldn't have to support a business model? And like you said, Diane, no one forces us to use any of this stuff. Anyway, my point's made.
So in 2008, we had a dramatic event where $35 trillion of market capitalization was lost in just 16 months. And that shook people's trust to the very core. In fact, today, trust in government in the US is at 19%. We don't trust our leaders to lead us forward. And we have a section on blockchain, which is coming up tomorrow. The blockchain builds trust into very smart code. And just as Tim Berners-Lee released this www code 25 years ago, it's been transformational. Blockchain will be just as transformational, and we won't need government to intermediate or banks to intermediate. Blockchain will be as transformational to our society as the web has been to date. It will be head-spinning, and Gates said we overestimate the amount of change in 2 years and underestimate it in 10. And so technology is actually democratizing commerce via blockchain. Bitcoin is one example, and we're at such early stages, but it actually gives the power back to the people to transact, the remittance market. Your Filipino nanny sends $200 back to the Philippines. The banks charge her 11.18%, but blockchain will facilitate it for 0.25%. It will be transformational, and we're just at early stages of this. So I see the hope of greater trust, better decisions, voting, deciding. We could all decide instantaneously online with blockchain that would actually verify who we are. The election you cited is in a first-past-the-post electoral system that's 200 years old. We got to get into the 21st century. We got to get modern.
Okay, I think everybody who wants it can have one last turn around. Mr. Harris has pointed out that tomorrow we're going to deal with two transformative technology. One of them is blockchain, and the other one is marijuana. Do you want to start?
Well, I find a certain disconnect in the whole conversation. Of course, I come from an entirely different world and have spent my whole life literally in the third world, and I keep hearing about the wonderful transformational things that will affect people in the third world. To me, this sounds, excuse me, I apologize, but very much like a downtown Toronto discussion about the wonderful things in their life. And I don't see it being so transformational for people in the third world. I've seen cell phones have changed their lives in the way they bank, the way they move money around. I've seen that, but I've also seen that we have more refugees than ever before today. I don't see solutions to starvation in many of the places that I've been lately, and the great minds of today seem to be preoccupied with these things, not about the other, and also we keep talking about our morality and our need to figure out our ethics when we are dealing with world players who have nothing in common with us at all. So we're sort of speaking into a void.
Salim?
I think we're seeing kind of four major things happen in the world today. I mentioned the 20 Gutenberg moments. I mentioned the fact that this will break most of our institutions. I just made the point that our leadership structures are not set up for this. We have to figure out mechanisms to transition this in a very quick way. I think we've got about a 20, 25-year transition of changing the world from scarcity material, local linear incremental thinking into a much more abundance pattern, which actually does affect everybody in the world. It's hard to spot sometimes, but it really does. And if we kind of have about an existential threat in that 20, 25 years, if we can come out the other side, we'll be in good shape. One of our colleagues has made the point that we have two options for our future. We're either heading for a Star Trek or a Mad Max future. And today we're pretty clearly heading towards Mad Max. We have to figure out how to tilt that future the other way.
Peter.
Let me address the point you just made about impacting the developing world. And mention my other day job, which is as CEO of the X Prize. Our focus is to say, what is the world we want to actively create in 20 years? Not haphazardly bump into it. What is the world we want to create in energy and water and food and shelter and healthcare and education? And actually set a target and implement that world, because we're more empowered to do that than ever. So we have something called the Global Learning X Prize. It's a $15 million purse funded by Elon Musk. And we had 800 teams developing software on an Android tablet. We've narrowed it down to 5. We've deployed it on 2,500 tablets, 2,500 kids in Tanzania. We're testing right now. The goal is that that piece of software will allow a child with nothing other than a solar charger to self-educate, from illiteracy to reading, writing, and numeracy in 18 months on their own. We have another X Prize called the Water Abundance X Prize going on in India right now. The teams are being asked, take 2,000 liters of drinking water out of the atmosphere for less than 2 cents a liter and deliver it to a village, right? There's so much water out there. It's not about scarcity, it's about in a usable form. We're getting ready to launch an X Prize that Tony Robbins underwriting for feeding the next 1 billion people, for saving the coral reefs, for energy, off-grid energy, for predicting hurricanes and earthquakes. We're living in a world where we can actively, forget about complaining, solve the problems.
Right.
I think the X Prize and the other initiatives that Peter and others have done, deploying technology as a useful, virtuous tool for everybody in the world, are really important because they can have the power to undermine the regimes that stand in the way of people realizing their potential. So that's number one. Number two, I really, really have to say, nobody does trust other people. They don't trust governments. We don't trust our institutions. That's why I think that the scientists, engineers, and the technologists in the field have to do an Oppenheimer time. It's time for another Oppenheimer and really start to get and address the lack of governance.
Rob.
I completely agree with you, and that's in large part why Singularity University, you will find it all over the world. We have 107 chapters now in 65 countries. We have events at this scale happening in 15 countries this year, having this kind of a conversation. And I have no doubt, and we've charted many graphs, we see how these technologies will continue to progress exponentially. And that will give us capabilities to solve the problems we've always thought impossible to solve. But where do we want to go is the ultimate question. And right now, we are not talking about the future, I believe, in a productive way, and bringing the diversity of perspectives to it. And I completely believe we are at a pivotal point, and I think the next 30 years is it, where we are going to determine whether we're creating Star Trek or Mad Max. And it is not a technology problem. It's social and political courage and leadership problem. And I do completely agree that we need new focus on values and principles, and it's not a nation-state focus. It's an Asilomar-like global convening where we decide where do we want the future of humanity to go, and what do we think about the future of jobs specifically in the short term. And I think our whole mindset needs to shift about what we want to build for our kids and our children's future, because I don't think they want a job to survive, and they don't need it. But if our current industrial-minded systems hold on to this concept that everyone needs to have a job for identity to others, we're solving the wrong problem.
Well, since you brought up kids, I will say there's one thing that I think is concerning right now is a trend of these companies that we're mostly collectively concerned about right now, targeting kids. I think there's efforts to have Messenger for kids and Alexa for kids, and they talk about privacy, but those are your opt-in privacy settings. They're collecting on the back end the same way they do for adults, and this is a generation that's not making their own decisions. So I think if we're, we can make our decisions for ourselves, but for the next generation, I think we should be especially cautious of some of these issues. I also think that issue of access is a huge, huge issue. And even in our own country, there's a lot of communities that don't have access, that our northern communities are remote communities. And the UN has said, our government has said that access should be a human right. Certainly information is power in 2018 and will only continue to be that. But we've still got private companies that are the ones who, if there's not a large enough population, if it's too rocky and remote to get there, they don't want to invest because they're not going to see the payoff. So I think the issue of access is something that hopefully you guys will solve, but something that we need to be working towards as well.
Yeah, I'll close by saying this. I think that we are getting to a certain untenable situation with regards to society and technology and business and how it's all kind of interplaying. I think it is genuinely getting that tense. I think that you have inspirational leaders, specifically leaders that are doing a lot of work in this space, people like Peter, people like Elon. And I think that it's immensely commendable. I would just say, and this is more of a word to the audience and all of us really, is that don't outsource your responsibility to one another and to yourself and to the rest of humanity to benevolent businesses or benevolent leaders. It's our collective responsibility to be able to make sure that we take care of what is often categorized as the external costs of the life that we live in these markets and in the Western world. Because we can't just outsource that responsibility to private companies. And we have to use stuff like the public use of reason, which Immanuel Kant talks a lot about or wrote a lot about. Doesn't talk anymore, obviously. And I just think that we also need to use technology to do hard work. I think that the easier problems of technology have been solved with communications and media and publishing. But I think there's hard work to be done in the world, and there's hard work also to be done on ourselves in critically evaluating what we think, what we believe, and what we want, because that technology will force you to think about those things, but then it'll immediately externalize it, and it can scale if it's not necessarily done in the right way. It can have massive consequences. So I implore you to think about those things.
Well, this has been an absolutely fascinating debate, just an amazing way to start. Diane and I every year are over at WEF together, World Economic Forum in Davos, and this year Oxfam released a report showing the 8 wealthiest individuals in the world have the same net worth as 3.5 billion poorest on the planet. That isn't a technology problem, right? We need to get to the ethical issues Diane's talking about how do we live sustainably on this planet. And some of the technologies we've been talking about today, like blockchain, like who's in charge of Wikipedia? Nobody. We collectively both consume Wikipedia and create all the entries. So having a decentralized technology that allows us to create solutions to the problems we face, I see as a very empowering thing that we're going to need to embrace. And I think in Canada, we have a set of values that are quite different than the US. So I see Canada as a wonderful place to attract the world's leading AI scientists, blockchain coders, to create the vision of the future that we want as Canadians, as opposed to, I love your point, let's not abdicate responsibility. We should take it, and we're uniquely positioned. Ethereum was created right here in Toronto. That's the number 2 altcoin. But we have this unique position. We're loved by people in the world. Here in Toronto, there's more languages spoken, mother tongues, than any other city on the planet. We are the Constantinople of the modern world, and I think we should take our responsibility to lead forward using technology and create a better world.
Thank you, Jim.
He was a political leader.
It's been quite the marathon, longest session ever in the history of IdeaCity. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Sasha, Ramona, Rob, Diane, Peter, Salim, and Matthew, and thank you all for listening. Those of you who are out there in television land, yes, this conference is now being run live on a channel called One, as well as a whole bunch of Zoomer Media websites. If you want to vote, go to idea.ca/poll, and we might report the vote if it changes in any dramatic way later on in the conference.
How many of you after this panel are more optimistic about technology? Green. And less? Where's the reds? Okay, more optimistic, got it.
About
Thank
50-50? Yeah. All right. And thank you all.
Okay. Thank you.